Hello, dear listeners. Today, we want to explore one of the most fascinating paradoxes of human nature. Why do humans repeatedly make wrong choices, even when they know better? And why do they choose to turn away when faced with truth? This question goes beyond simple curiosity and touches the core of our lives. Everyone has probably asked themselves at least once, why do I repeat the same mistakes again? Or, why do I want to avoid uncomfortable truths? This phenomenon is not merely a lack of willpower or personal flaw, but a complex and fascinating phenomenon that reflects the fundamental characteristics of human existence. We are all contradictory beings who want to know the truth while simultaneously wanting to avoid it. At the same time, we want to live better lives while avoiding the changes necessary to achieve them. This paradoxical phenomenon is not just a psychological mechanism, but reflects the fundamental characteristics of human existence. In this text, we will deeply explore this problem from neuroscientific, psychological, philosophical, and theological perspectives, seeking practical ways to overcome our repetitive failure patterns and truth avoidance phenomena. Along with academic analysis of human behavioral patterns, we will also examine methods that can be applied to daily life. Chapter 1: The duality of human behavior. The gap between knowing and acting. We often call humans rational beings. Since the Enlightenment, Western civilization has placed extremely high value on human rational abilities. Descartes' proposition, "I think, therefore I am," defined humans as essentially thinking beings. However, when we carefully observe our behavior, we can easily discover contradictory actions that are difficult to explain through reason alone. Why do people who know that cigarettes are harmful to health continue to smoke? In most countries, cigarette packages contain warning messages like "smoking causes lung cancer" and "smoking causes premature death." Smokers read these messages every day. They are well aware of the scientific evidence about the harm of cigarettes. Nevertheless, they continue to smoke. Similarly, why can't we exercise restraint when we know that overeating and excessive drinking are harmful? In modern society, health problems related to obesity are widely known. Everyone knows the seriousness of diseases directly related to overeating, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease. It's also common knowledge that excessive drinking harms liver health and can lead to alcohol addiction. Nevertheless, many people repeat overeating and excessive drinking. This contradiction in human behavior has been observed and analyzed by ancient philosophers. The ancient Roman philosopher Seneca said, "We know the right path, but we do not follow it." This is an insight from 2,000 years ago, but it remains valid today. Seneca himself confessed that although he knew and taught the principles of Stoic philosophy, he could not perfectly practice those principles in his actual life. The Greek philosopher Aristotle presented the concept of akrasia. This means weakness of will, or lack of self-control, but more precisely refers to the act of choosing something worse while knowing something better. Aristotle saw this as an important characteristic of human nature. Meanwhile, the Apostle Paul makes a similar confession in Romans 7:15. "I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do." This is not merely a personal confession, but a deep insight into the universal characteristics of human nature after the fall. Paul continues in verses 18 to 19. "For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing." This very accurately describes the divided state of the human inner being. Interestingly, this phenomenon is not simply a matter of lack of willpower. According to modern neuroscience and psychology research, our brain consists of multiple systems with different goals and desires, and these do not always work harmoniously. One system pursues long-term benefits. This is mainly related to the prefrontal cortex and is responsible for planning, abstract thinking, and future-oriented decision-making. This system sets long-term goals such as, I should exercise for health, I should save for the future, and I should grow through learning. In contrast, another system wants immediate satisfaction. This is mainly related to the limbic system, especially the dopamine system, and pursues immediate rewards and pleasure. This system generates desires like, I want to eat delicious food right now, I want to rest comfortably, and I want to do only enjoyable things. The problem is that these two systems often conflict. To achieve long-term goals, we often must give up immediate satisfaction. To exercise, we must give up current comfort. To save, we must suppress current consumption desires. To study, we must give up immediate entertainment. Chapter 2. The Dominance of Emotions and Neurological Mechanisms. Humans are not simply rational beings. We are also emotional beings. Perhaps emotions are a more fundamental attribute than reason. For a long time, Western philosophy and psychology have regarded emotions as the opposite of reason, sometimes as obstacles. However, modern neuroscience shows that this dichotomous thinking is inaccurate. According to research by modern neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, emotions are not simply elements that interfere with rational judgment, but rather are core elements of decision-making. Damasio studied patients who had damage to specific areas of the prefrontal cortex. These patients had normal intellectual abilities, but impaired emotional processing capabilities. Surprisingly, they had serious difficulties making rational decisions. For example, they could not properly schedule simple appointments. They could logically analyze numerous options, but could not decide which one to choose. This shows that emotions do not simply interfere with reason, but play an essential role in decision-making. Strong emotions such as anxiety, fear, loneliness, and anger easily undermine rational judgment and encourage impulsive behavior. In highly stressful situations, we often experience emotional hijacking. This is a term used by psychologist Daniel Goleman to describe the phenomenon where strong emotions momentarily paralyze rational thinking. This can be explained neurologically. When a threatening stimulus is detected, the amygdala immediately activates. The amygdala responds before sending information to the prefrontal cortex. This is called the amygdala bypass and was evolutionarily advantageous for survival, but often causes inappropriate reactions in modern society. For example, when receiving criticism from a supervisor at work, the amygdala may perceive this as a threat. Then the fight or flight response is activated, possibly leading to aggressive rebuttal or withdrawal. However, such reactions are not appropriate in a work environment. A better response would be to constructively accept criticism and seek improvement plans. When feeling lonely, we may cling to toxic relationships even when we know they are harmful. Loneliness is a very painful emotion for humans. Evolutionarily, being excluded from the group meant death, so our brains process loneliness as a life-threatening danger signal. Therefore, when lonely, we try to maintain any relationship, even if it is abusive or manipulative. When anxious, we may depend on behaviors that temporarily alleviate anxiety, but cause bigger problems in the long term. Anxiety is the brain's response to uncertainty and uncontrollable situations. The brain tries to quickly resolve this uncomfortable state, and because behaviors like overeating or drinking can reduce anxiety temporarily, we repeat such behaviors. When depressed, we may fall into thought and behavior patterns that make us more depressed. When depressed, energy is low, self-esteem drops, and hope for the future diminishes. In this state, we tend to just lie in bed, avoid contact with people, or become absorbed in self-critical thoughts. These behaviors may seem to conserve energy and avoid additional hurt in the short term, but they deepen depression in the long term. The Bible also acknowledges this powerful influence of emotions. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Here, heart refers not simply to emotions, but to our entire inner world. This verse contains the deep insight that our actions and choices ultimately stem from our inner state. Chapter 3: Neuroplasticity and the Power of Habit. Why the brain prefers repetition. Another important reason why humans repeat the same mistakes, even when they know better, is related to how our brain operates. In neuroscience, there is a concept called neuroplasticity. This refers to the brain's ability to change structurally and functionally according to experience. Previously, it was thought that adult brains do not change, but modern research shows that the brain can change throughout life. Neuroplasticity is summarized by Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time we repeat a specific behavior, the connections between neurons related to that behavior are strengthened. It's like walking the same path repeatedly in a forest. That path becomes clearer and easier to walk. This strengthening of neural pathways allows us to perform certain behaviors unconsciously and almost automatically. This is the neurological foundation of habit. When habits are formed, those behaviors can be executed without conscious effort. According to research by MIT neuroscientist Anne Gray-Beal, habits are processed in the brain's basal ganglia, specifically in an area called the striatum. When learning new behaviors, the entire brain is activated. But when those behaviors become habituated, only the basal ganglia are activated, and activity in other brain regions decreases. This is advantageous in terms of energy efficiency. Conscious decision-making consumes a lot of energy. The process of analyzing all options, comparing pros and cons, and making the best decision is complex and tiring. In contrast, habituated behaviors work like autopilot, minimizing conscious effort. The problem is that once formed neural pathways and habits do not change easily. Our brain basically prefers stability over change. This can be understood from an evolutionary perspective, as uncertainty and change meant potential danger. Therefore, our brain tends to continue following already familiar patterns. This is one of the important reasons why we repeat wrong behaviors, even when we know they are wrong. The Bible also contains an understanding of the power of habit. Jeremiah 13:23 says, "Can an Ethiopian change his skin, or a leopard its spots? Neither can you do good who are accustomed to doing evil." This verse vividly shows how difficult it is to change habituated behavioral patterns. Here, the expression accustomed to is the passive form of the Hebrew verb lamad, which means to be taught or to be trained. In other words, it refers to being trained in evil behavior. This refers not simply to making bad choices, but to a state where bad behavior has become a natural, automatic response. Harvard University psychologist William James said, "Habit is our destiny." This may be a somewhat exaggerated expression, but it well demonstrates the powerful influence of habit. Our daily lives consist mostly of habituated behaviors, and these habits come together to determine our life's trajectory. Chapter 4: The responsibility that truth demands and the instinct of self-preservation. Truth is not simply the acquisition of knowledge. Coming to know the truth entails responsibility, that is, changing behavior accordingly. This is one of the most fundamental reasons why humans avoid truth. As Socrates said, ignorance is bliss, because once you know, you bear the burden of acting accordingly. In philosophy, this is also called the excuse of ignorance. This is the principle that moral and legal responsibility can be reduced or exempted when in a state of ignorance. However, once you know, you receive moral condemnation if you do not act according to that knowledge. Humans have an instinct for self-preservation. This includes not only simple physical survival, but also the desire to maintain psychological and mental integrity. When truth threatens this integrity, we instinctively try to avoid or distort that truth. According to Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance theory, humans tend to maintain consistency between their beliefs, values, and actions. However, sometimes new information or truth conflicts with existing systems. In such cases, there are two choices: modify existing beliefs or distort or ignore new information. Another way to resolve cognitive dissonance is confirmation bias. This is the tendency to seek and accept only information that supports one's existing beliefs, while ignoring or rejecting opposing information. This phenomenon is intensifying in modern society and within many churches. Truth avoidance is also related to social identity. We are social beings who gain stability and identity from feeling that we belong to specific groups. However, when some truth conflicts with the beliefs or values of the group we belong to, we often choose group belonging. Let's take religious communities as an example. Suppose a person belonging to a community with specific religious beliefs encounters scientific evidence or historical facts that conflict with those beliefs. This person has two choices. The first choice can lead to alienation from the group, loss of social relationships, and identity crisis. In contrast, the second choice allows maintaining existing social relationships and identity. In many cases, people choose the second option. This is not so much individual weakness as the result of human social nature. We are beings who find it difficult to survive alone, and the feeling of belonging to a group provides psychological stability and physical safety. Chapter 5: Threats to Self-Identity and Cognitive Dissonance. Truth sometimes threatens our self-identity. It can shake our fundamental understanding of who we are, what we believe, and what values we have. Self-identity is not a simple concept, but a complex structure composed of multiple layers. Psychologist William James defined the self as the sum total of all that a person can call his own. For example, imagine a person who has lived with specific religious beliefs all their life, encountering scientific evidence that conflicts with those beliefs. For this person, accepting that evidence is not simply accepting information. What's important is that this has no direct relationship with intellectual ability or education level. Even very intelligent and educated people can react irrationally to information that threatens their identity. This is because it's not a matter of information processing, but of identity protection. This phenomenon can easily be found in the history of science, as Thomas Kuhn pointed out in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. When new scientific paradigms emerge, scientists with identities based on existing paradigms often resist. For example, during the transition from geocentric to heliocentric theory, many astronomers were reluctant to accept Copernicus's theory. This was not simply because there was insufficient evidence, but because their existing worldview and professional identity were threatened. The same is true in modern times. When a scholar who has researched based on a specific theory or methodology for decades encounters new evidence or theory that points out fundamental flaws in that theory, it can be difficult to evaluate it objectively. Their academic identity, published papers, content taught to students, and position in academic societies are all connected to the existing theory. Maintaining identity consumes a lot of psychological energy. Particularly, maintaining an identity that conflicts with reality requires even more energy. This increases cognitive load and can reduce the ability to concentrate on other important matters. For example, a person who overestimates their abilities must expend mental energy every time reality doesn't match that overestimation to interpret and justify the difference. Every time they experience failure, they must create explanations like, "I was unlucky," "other people interfered," or "the situation was special." And clergy or theologians with wrong ideas emphasize only verses from the Bible that can justify their claims, ignoring the overall context of the Bible and obsessing only with specific verses and situations. Through the collective of denominations, they spread their beliefs and ideas to society as if they were universal truths. Chapter 6. Various Mechanisms of Truth Avoidance. The ways humans avoid truth are very diverse and creative. Examining these methods gives us a glimpse into the complexity and sophistication of human psychology. Among these, the most basic and widespread mechanisms are selective exposure and confirmation bias. We tend to be exposed more to information that aligns with our existing beliefs and accept it more easily. This is called selective exposure and confirmation bias. This is not simply the result of conscious choice, but a deep-level phenomenon related to the brain's information processing methods. Humans show remarkable ability to distort reality to justify their actions or beliefs. Freud called this defense mechanisms. These defense mechanisms are not conscious lies, but unconscious psychological processes. From an anthropological perspective, truth avoidance is not an individual phenomenon, but a cultural phenomenon. Each culture has its unique worldview, and this worldview serves as a lens through which individuals belonging to that culture interpret reality. According to research by Yale University's Dan Kahan, people tend to interpret even scientific facts in ways that align with the values of the cultural group they belong to. For example, when evaluating scientific evidence about climate change, the cultural group's values have a greater impact than an individual's level of scientific knowledge. When some information threatens an individual's fundamental worldview, they have strong motivation to reject or distort that information. This is not simply denying specific facts, but defending their entire life meaning system. Chapter 7. The complex interaction of environment and social influence. If our friends, family, and colleagues regard specific behaviors as normal or desirable, we are more likely to accept and follow those behaviors. This applies not only to positive behaviors, but also to negative behaviors. For example, in workplaces or social groups with strong drinking cultures, it becomes much more difficult for individuals to abstain from alcohol. Conversely, in groups that value healthy lifestyle habits, healthy choices are made naturally. Humans instinctively fear being excluded from groups. This is because evolutionarily, survival in groups was essential for individual survival. Therefore, we have strong motivation to meet group norms and expectations. This conformity pressure also affects truth perception. If a group is uncomfortable with specific truths, individuals are more likely to choose harmony with the group rather than facing those truths. Taking Nazi Germany as an example, many Germans claimed they didn't know about the existence of the Holocaust. Of course, some really might not have known, but many chose to ignore or deny that horrific truth rather than face it. This is both individual moral cowardice and the result of collective self-deception mechanisms at work. Group polarization can occur within groups. This is the phenomenon where people take more extreme positions when belonging to a group than when alone. This is because when people with similar opinions gather in a group, they tend to reinforce and extremize each other's opinions. Opposing opinions are excluded, and only supporting opinions are repeated, gradually reaching more extreme conclusions. As Michel Foucault pointed out, Power and truth maintain a close relationship. Those with power have the ability to define and control truth. This goes beyond simply concealing information to the more fundamental power of deciding what is accepted as truth. Those in power sometimes try to maintain their position by hiding or distorting uncomfortable truths. And these distorted truths permeate throughout society through education systems, media, and cultural norms. People have developed a strong tendency to reject information they don't want by labeling it fake news. This has become a new form of truth avoidance that distinguishes not between truth and falsehood, but between information that is comfortable and uncomfortable for them. Chapter 8. The Journey of Deep Change, Spiritual and Psychological Integration. True change requires not simply behavioral modification, but deeper levels of change. This relates to our ways of thinking, values, identity, and ultimately our spiritual state. Sustainable change is difficult to achieve through external behavioral change alone. Internal change must accompany it. In Christian theology, this deep change is called sanctification. This is the process of gradually becoming like Christ with the help of the Holy Spirit. Sanctification is not completed in an instant, but is a lifelong journey of growth and change. Romans 12:2 well explains the nature of this change. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Here, the expression renewing of your mind refers not to simple behavioral modification, but to fundamental change in thinking patterns and values. This is similar to the concept of cognitive restructuring in modern psychology. What's important in the process of sanctification is the balance between God's grace and human effort. This is a balanced approach that avoids both Pelagianism, which emphasizes only human effort, and antinomianism, which emphasizes only grace while ignoring effort. Philippians 2:12-13 shows this balance well. Therefore, my dear friends, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill His good purpose. This passage shows that our effort and God's work operate together. Change is accomplished not through our effort alone, nor through God's grace alone, but through the cooperation of both. The ultimate goal of all spiritual growth is to become like Christ. Romans 8:29 says, For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son. For deep change, an eternal perspective beyond simply the present or near future is needed. 2 Corinthians 4:17-18 says, For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Hope for heaven is not escapism, but becomes motivation for present life. 1 John 3:2-3 says, Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. All who have this hope in Him purify themselves, just as He is pure. That is, hope for future perfect change becomes motivation for living a holy life in the present. Chapter 9. The Paradox of Human Nature and the Possibility of Hope. So far, we have explored various aspects of the phenomenon where humans repeatedly make wrong choices even when they know better and turn away from truth. These two phenomena appear to be different problems on the surface, but are actually two faces of human nature with the same root. At the core of both phenomena is avoidance of discomfort and resistance to change. We repeatedly make wrong choices even when we know better to avoid the discomfort that change requires. And we choose to turn away to avoid the pain that truth would bring. This is not simple individual weakness, but a natural human protective mechanism. Our brains evolved to prioritize survival, which operates in favor of stability and predictability while avoiding risk and uncertainty. Even if the current state is not optimal, known states feel safer than unknown states. Looking deeper, these two phenomena create a complex, vicious cycle that reinforces each other. By turning away from uncomfortable truths, we fail to recognize the true consequences of wrong behavior. Repeated failures threaten self-esteem and bring confusion to identity. This causes us to flee even more from the uncomfortable truth of acknowledging our failures. As this vicious cycle continues, the gap between reality and self-image widens. To solve this, more sophisticated self-deception and rationalization become necessary, ultimately further reducing reality perception ability. Psychologically, both phenomena share the following common mechanisms. First, cognitive dissonance. The discomfort from inconsistency between what we know and our actions, and differences between reality and beliefs, is at the core of both phenomena. To resolve this discomfort, we distort reality or selectively process information. Second, self-protection. Mechanisms to protect ourselves from information or experiences that threaten self-esteem and identity operate. This is an individual's psychological survival strategy, but in the long term, it hinders growth and adaptation. Third, confirmation bias. The tendency to selectively accept only information that aligns with existing beliefs, while ignoring or distorting inconsistent information, appears commonly in both phenomena. From a Christian theological perspective, both phenomena are explained by fallen human nature and separation from God. The human tendency to know God's will but not follow it, and to prefer darkness over God's truth, are both fundamental characteristics of sin. Also, the tendency to refuse to acknowledge one's wrongs and try to justify them, and the desire to make oneself appear right, are the common roots of both phenomena. Valuing one's own comfort, reputation, and safety more than God is the spiritual dimension of both phenomena. Therefore, due to idolatry, spiritual eyes become darkened, unable to discern truth, and unable to distinguish between God's will and one's own desires. However, the Bible does not present only despair. It presents the possibility of change and recovery through God's grace and the Holy Spirit's help. The promise in John 8:32, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free," shows liberation through accepting truth. And Philippians 2:13, "For it is God who works in you," shows the possibility of change through God's help. Ultimately, our repeatedly making wrong choices even when we know better, and turning away from truth is not a flaw that can be completely removed, but part of being human. What's important is not completely eliminating these tendencies, but recognizing them and managing them wisely. The Bible does not demand perfection from us. Instead, it requires a repentant heart, a humble attitude, and the will toward continuous growth. Proverbs 24:16 says, "For though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again," emphasizing the importance of getting back up after failure. When we honestly acknowledge our weaknesses and failures, we can experience deeper connections with others. It's difficult to form genuine relationships with people who pretend to be perfect, but reciprocal and supportive relationships become possible with people who acknowledge their weaknesses. Individual change and growth must ultimately lead to the maturity of the entire community. Ephesians 4:13 says, "Until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ." This is a journey toward communal perfection, rather than individual perfection. When each person acknowledges their weaknesses and supports each other, the entire community can move toward Christ's maturity. We cannot be perfect alone, but within community, we can grow together, filling each other's shortcomings. While understanding and accepting the paradox of human nature, we must not stop our efforts for change and growth. This is a journey, not a destination, a process, not completion. Conclusion. Finding perfect love in imperfection. Through the phenomenon of humans repeatedly making wrong choices even when they know better and choosing to turn away when faced with truth, we have simultaneously discovered the complexity and beauty of human nature. The core message of all this exploration is simple yet profound. We are imperfect beings, but it is precisely in that imperfection that we can experience God's perfect love. Romans 5:8 says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." God's love is not something we can receive only after becoming perfect, but grace given in our very imperfect state. This understanding is not an end, but a new beginning. The following journey unfolds before us. First, the journey of self-acceptance, a journey of learning maturity that acknowledges one's weaknesses and limitations while not giving up. Second, the journey of truth-seeking, a journey of facing truth, even if uncomfortable, and experiencing freedom and growth through that truth. Third, the journey of community formation, a journey of achieving together the changes that cannot be accomplished alone, supporting each other. Fourth, walking with God, a journey of depending on God's grace in all processes of change and growth while following the guidance of the Holy Spirit. We know this journey will not be easy. We will continue to feel the temptation to make wrong choices, even when we know better, and to turn away from uncomfortable truths. But we have hope. Dear friends, thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope all this content leads not to mere knowledge, but to life transformation. Be courageous. Acknowledging your weaknesses is not defeat, but the first step of growth. Be patient. Change does not happen overnight. Small progress also has great meaning. Depend. What you cannot do alone can be done, together with God and community. And have hope. Current difficulties are not eternal, and a better future is possible. I close this text with the promise of 1 Thessalonians 5:24. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. Because God who called us is faithful, he will surely complete the process of change and growth he began. With this confidence, please begin a new journey starting today. I hope this content will be of practical help in your lives and, above all, become an opportunity to experience God's love and grace more deeply. If this content has helped you, please share it with others around you. I hope this will not end as personal enlightenment alone, but that more people can walk the journey of growth together. I pray that God's abundant grace and peace will be with you on your life's journey. Thank you